Hey, this is Frank Mataratona, producer engineer at Voodoo Studios, and we're going to do a little Pro Tools 101. We're going to take you through the basics of the program from the very start, starting the program, creating a session from scratch, creating click tracks, tempo maps, audio files, saving, troubleshooting basic sound, signal flow issues, and just get you proficient in the program so even if you've never used it before, you'll know what we're doing and how to get yourself up and running. So I'm literally going to start from scratch. Program is not open. I have no pre-made sessions. I am going to be creating a blank session the way you would if you'd never used it before. So I'm gonna go over to my dock, open Pro Tools. Splash screen is gonna show up. This is an HD version of Pro Tools. You don't have to have Pro Tools HD. That's just what we're using on this system. We have 3 different versions in this studio. So it's gonna scan plugins, go through its whole rigmarole of analyzing the hardware and the playback engine and let you know if anything is not installed or recognized. It's gonna go over authorization. Most of you will have some sort of hardware or iLock or cloud-based iLock that allows the program to run. That needs to be connected or plugged in order for the software to be authorized. If it's authorized and installed properly, it should open up without issue. I've got the main quick start screen here. It may start like this. You just click this little arrow if you want the expanded parameters, and you'll see that it gives you the choice of starting with templates or recent used versions. We're going to do a blank session. It's okay if you don't have last used I/O. I/O just stands for in-out. And if you have preferences for sample rate and bit depth, that's okay. We're going to use 24-bit and 48 kilohertz. Now that is just referencing the dynamic range. That's bit depth. That's sort of about like how many volume steps are in the audio. You don't have to worry about it. Basically everybody uses 24. That's plenty. 24-bit, 48 kilohertz, industry standard. That's what we're going to use. I'm going to record in WAV. That's the lossless audio format, industry standard. No reason to change that. My last use I/O settings will show up, and we're going to go ahead and see what happens. Hit OK. I'm going to be prompted with a dialog to choose where to save the session. Now, whenever you make a Pro Tools session, it's going to create a folder, and we have different, artist folders and things like that. I'm just going to write Pro Tools 101. I'm going to save it to the main hard drive. Right there, that's the session drive. And this is the screen that's going to pop up. There are no clips, there are no groups, there are no tracks, nothing is created for us. There are some basic views that you should acquaint yourself with just to get around in the program. I'm going to go over that first. So this right here is our edit window. This is where you would physically see the audio clips and regions. This is where, if you were recording, you'd see the waveform being drawn. It is probably the best overall view of the session. You'll have basic mixing, you'll have basic processing, plugins, sends and returns, fader views, things like that, lists of all of the audio kind of appears in this main screen. So this is the one you'll probably be acquainted with the most, get to know it. Alternatively, you have the mix view. To get to the mix window, you literally just go to Window and click the window you want. There are basically 3 basic windows. The 2 you use most will be the edit window and the mix window. There's also MIDI editors and score editors and things like that for when you have MIDI arrangements. But if we were to go to mix, we'd have this window here. And there are no tracks yet, but it does say mix on the window, edit on the window. So you could see that's what we're doing. Next, we're just going to add some tracks and looking a little more like a Pro Tools session. To do that, you can either use your menus, or what I recommend would be a basic shortcut. And the great part about this program is it's going to kind of tell you a lot of the shortcuts right on the menu. So if you were to go here, new session, open session, close session, save, track, new track, it gives you the shortcuts. Just a little disclaimer, as we go throughout these, I'm going to be using Macintosh commands. All right, so I'm going to create a new track. I go to track, big surprise, new. And there's another dialog. Gives us the number, the channels, the type of track, samples or ticks, which is the way it's going to record, additional options to make more. Now, if you didn't want to use the menus or if you get what it is, new, N. Apple, new session, new track, shift, Apple or command N. There's your shortcut for new track. We're going to make one mono audio track, and then there's samples and ticks. I recommend samples, especially if you're doing audio. Ticks refers to sort of the MIDI internal clock So if you're doing MIDI, it's going to automatically come up in ticks. It's going to be synced to the tempo map and things like that in the session. So as you were to change the tempo, the MIDI is going to change with it. Audio track 1, mono, in samples, create, and there's our track. If we wanted to make 5 tracks, we would just go same thing, Shift Apple N, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 5, same thing, and there's 5 tracks at once. The next step in recording would be making sure that there is the correct ins and outs for this track. Now you can set up your preferences to have defaults and things like that, but at the end of the day, if you're in a different studio, new system, you're gonna need to know how to troubleshoot them. So we're gonna go over to the I/O, that's under setup, and we're gonna sort of troubleshoot a basic problem, which would be if there was no sound on a track. So say you'd recorded something, you got this clip, and you play it, and there's no sound. And if there wasn't a proper output, you'd see this region gets grayed. So that would indicate that there's no active output and the track is not going to play. The first thing you can do is going to go to the output on the I/O panel of your edit window or your mix window. It's also here as well. If you don't see that panel, you're going to go over to View, go either your mix view or your edit view, whichever one you're in, and add the appropriate panel. Right now I have I/O checked. If I were to uncheck it, it disappears. I can't mess with track ins and outs. So the first thing I would do is go down the list, click on it, go to outs, not buses, outs, and select the output path. And if that doesn't fix it, then there may be a problem with mapping. At that point, you'd go into setup, I/O, and look at where the paths are connected. That's all this is. It's a little daunting to look at. It scared me the first time, but I'm going to explain it to you in a very basic way so that you can sort of get through it. Your ins, your outs, that's related to your hardware, and then bus. Bus is internal. Bus just refers to a pathway that connects anything. It can connect a track to a track, and into a track and out to a track, anything like that. Bus just means pathway. These are a list of all the buses that are in this I/O. As you can see, it's mapped here to an output. So if I was to go to output, you see the list of outputs. LR is our main left-right. It goes out our converter. Converter's attached to the speakers, gets us sound. The bus panel ensures that the bus that we're using is mapped to that output. Now I can send that to the wrong place and then we're not going to get sound. So very important, if you don't have sound and you have an output, check where that path is mapped to. Chances are hardware has changed, is named differently. And if you want to see what the actual output is, you go to output and you can see the actual output as it is labeled on your hardware. Now, if you were to hit default, that would go back to the factory setting. I'm just going to go ahead and do that and show you what it comes up as. So these are the default outs as they would appear in Pro Tools new. And as you can see, A12, it may be called something different in your hardware, but that's usually the main monitor path. And you can see it's mapped to an actual analog connection on this hardware. So anything that goes to that output is physically going to come out of that converter on that channel. And that's all this diagram shows. It's what channel goes to what spot on the hardware. All right, so now that we've got the output set, we're going to make sure that the interface is set to the right input. So I'm going to bring in input 1. The track has got an active input and an active output. That's what you need to record. Either one of those not correct, it's not going to let you. Once you've got your active input and output, you can enable the track or arm it. You can come over to the left side of the track here. This is called Audio 3. I definitely don't recommend. Give it the name for what it's going to be, even if it's test audio. That's going to name the file that the track records. And then you're just going to click on this little circular button within the square. That's the record button. Now the track is armed. Once you enter a recording mode, it's going to record on any track that is armed. If you've got this guy armed and this one here, when you start recording, it's going to record on all of them. While that process is going, you can't stop it. So never arm a track you don't want to record on while it's playing. Very important. You'll overwrite important information, lose something, make mistakes. So it's very important that you always check the red light. That's why it's a red light. It's super important. So that's the basics. That's what you're going to go through when you create a session from scratch. That's creating a session, naming it, storing it, the different windows that you're going to see when you open up a blank session, how to create a track. Any questions, feel free to email us.